It was a rainy Friday evening when I arrived at my daughter Emily's house for her son Jake's birthday party. I had been looking forward to it all week, feeling a sense of excitement as I prepared a small gift for my grandson. It wasn't much, but it was something special, a handcrafted wooden toy that I had carved myself. I knew Jake would love it, and that was enough for me. The drive had been long, but the thought of seeing my daughter and grandson always lifted my spirits. However, as I rang the doorbell, I had a strange feeling, something that told me I wasn't going to be welcomed the way I had expected. Emily, who usually greeted me with a warm smile, was nowhere in sight. Instead, it was her husband Greg who opened the door. He didn't even seem to acknowledge me at first, and I immediately noticed the tension in the air. His eyes barely met mine as he gave a quick, distracted gesture for me to step inside. "Come in, Mom. Emily's upstairs getting ready," he muttered. There was something off in his tone, something that set me on edge, but I shook it off. After all, I was here to see my grandson, and that should have been enough. Still, the unspoken tension lingered as I stepped into the house. The living room was filled with unfamiliar faces, most of them high society types who spoke in hushed tones about their latest vacations or how their kids had gotten into prestigious schools. It felt like I had walked into a world I didn't belong to, one I had no place in. The sleek, modern furniture, the marble floors, the polished silverware, all of it screamed wealth and social status, but it also made me feel small, like an outsider in my own family. I clutched the small gift for Jake tightly in my hands, as if it were the only thing anchoring me to some semblance of normalcy. As I looked around, I spotted my grandson across the room, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma?" Jake called out excitedly, and for a moment, everything felt right again. He came running toward me, his small arms outstretched, and I couldn't help but smile. This was the part of the evening I had been looking forward to. I bent down to scoop him up, holding him close as I whispered, "I brought you something special, sweetheart." But before I could even pull out the toy, Emily appeared from behind the crowd. Her perfect hair was styled just right, her designer outfit looked effortlessly chic, and her eyes narrowed when she saw us. "Jake, remember what we talked about," Emily said in that cold, detached tone she reserved for me. "Go wash your hands before you touch anything." Her voice was sharp, and it carried a weight that made my heart drop. Jake, who had been so happy to see me, now looked up at his mother, his excitement quickly fading. He reluctantly slipped from my arms, his little face clouded with confusion. He went off to wash his hands, and I stood there, the gift still clenched in my hand, watching him leave. The air had shifted. It was no longer about the joy of a family gathering or the celebration of Jake's birthday. It had become something else. I could feel Emily's disdain, even if she hadn't spoken it aloud. As I made my way to the dining table, I noticed that the room had filled with even more guests, all dressed to the nines in their fine clothes. I had been seated at the far end of the table, away from Emily, away from Greg, and away from the rest of the family. It felt intentional. The seats beside me were occupied by two strangers who hardly paid me any attention, their voices drowning in their own conversations about their latest business acquisitions and their plans for private jets. The chatter felt out of place, disconnected from the reason I had come, a simple family celebration. I caught Greg's eye for a moment, hoping for some acknowledgement, some sign that he cared that I was here. But he only gave me a weak smile before turning away, probably to avoid the silent tension between his wife and me. I picked at my food, my appetite suddenly gone. How could I eat when I didn't belong? The silverware and fine china felt foreign in my hands. The conversations around me were all about wealth, status, and connections, things I had never cared much about. And yet, here I was, sitting in the middle of it all, feeling more invisible than ever. Then Emily's voice cut through the noise, loud and purposeful, directed squarely at me. "So, Mom," she said with that sugary sweetness that sent a shiver down my spine, "I heard you're still working at that little bakery. How quaint." She let the words hang in the air, the condescension dripping from her tone like honey. The guests around the table turned to look at me, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and pity. I swallowed, fighting to keep my composure. "Yes, I run a bakery," I said quietly, not wanting to make a scene. Emily's laughter followed, sharp and cold. A bakery. How charming, she repeated, as though the very thought of it was amusing. She turned to the woman beside her and whispered, "She's just a baker. Not quite the career you'd expect from someone with her background." The woman nodded politely, but I saw the subtle shift in her posture, as though my presence had suddenly become uncomfortable. I felt the heat rush to my face, my hands tightening around the napkin on my lap. It was a humiliation, plain and simple. But I wasn't going to let it show. The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur of awkward silences and strained smiles. The conversation around me continued without pause, but it was as if I was no longer part of the scene. The glances, the hushed tones, the way people subtly shifted away from me, each subtle rejection felt like a knife twisting in my chest. It wasn't just Emily's behavior that hurt. It was the realization that the people in this room, including my own family, saw me as nothing more than an accessory to their world. They had no interest in who I truly was, what I had built, or the person I had become. To them, I was just the poor old relative who didn't fit their carefully crafted image of success. Dinner came, and with it, another wave of discomfort. The table was set with more fine china than I could ever afford, gleaming silverware, and crystal glasses that caught the light in ways I'd only ever seen in magazines. I sat at the far end, tucked between two strangers who barely acknowledged my presence. I wasn't even seated next to Emily or Greg. I didn't expect to be, of course, but the way they had so clearly distanced me made my heart ache. I could feel the weight of the gap between us, both physical and emotional. The conversations around me were about vacations, country clubs, and the stock market, topics I had little knowledge of, but even less interest in. Still, I tried to be polite, chewing my food slowly, pretending to listen as the man next to me went on about his recent business acquisition. I could feel Emily's eyes on me every now and then, and when I dared to glance up, I found her watching me, her expression a mix of disdain and superiority. It stung more than I cared to admit. She had always been like this, but tonight, her treatment of me was unbearable. At one point, she leaned in and whispered something to Greg. I caught the tail end of their conversation, just enough to hear her dismissing me under her breath. "She's really going to embarrass us with that bakery talk, isn't she?" The words cut through me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been waiting for a moment like this, waiting for a chance to remind me of my place. The little toy I had carved for Jake remained untouched beside my plate, a reminder of how invisible I had become to my own daughter. After the main course, dessert was served. I tried to force a smile, trying to act as though I wasn't crushed by the weight of my isolation. But the moment little Jake ran toward me again, I felt a flicker of hope. He looked up at me, chocolate cake smeared all over his face, and I couldn't help but laugh at his innocent joy. "Grandma, will you tell me the story about the magical garden again?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. It was a story I had told him since he was a toddler, a special tale I had created about a magical garden where dreams grew like flowers. I had always loved seeing his face light up as I told him about the princess who saved herself, about the kindness and strength that came from within. But before I could say a word, Emily was there, her hand on Jake's shoulder, pulling him away. "Jake, get down from there," she snapped, her voice sharp and filled with anger. "Don't sit on Grandma's lap. You'll get your clothes dirty." I watched, helpless, as she yanked him away. My heart sank, the weight of her cruelty sinking in deeper than I could bear. She turned to me, her face twisted with irritation. "I think it's time you leave, Mom," she said, her words cold and final. I felt the air in the room freeze, the blood rushing to my ears. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell her how I had been treated, but no words came. Instead, she raised her voice, louder this time, so that the entire room could hear. "Security!" she called, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the other guests. "Could you escort this woman out? She's disturbing our family dinner." The room went silent. I felt all eyes on me, the weight of their judgment pressing down on my chest. I stood up, my legs shaking, and made my way to the door. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the pounding in my ears. The humiliation felt like a heavy cloak, suffocating me with each step. The laughter, the whispers, the pity in their eyes, it all felt so raw. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely find them. Once I was in my car, I slammed the door shut, trying to shut out the world. I didn't deserve this. I hadn't done anything wrong. But what could I do now? I was humiliated, rejected, and forced to leave my own grandson's birthday party. The tears that I had been holding back finally came. But even as I cried, something inside me hardened. This wasn't over. The next morning, I walked into the office of Morningstar Designs earlier than usual. I had built this company from the ground up, starting with nothing but a small loan and a dream. 30 years later, Morningstar was a thriving business, employing over 500 people. I had been the CEO for years, but my daughter, Emily, had no idea. She had always treated me as though I was invisible, as though my accomplishments meant nothing. She didn't know that the company she worked for was mine, and that today I was going to make sure she knew exactly who I was. I pulled up her employee file and felt the heat of anger rise in my chest as I read the complaints. Emily had been treating older employees poorly, belittling them for their age and experience. She had complained about their outdated methods and had humiliated them in front of others. My blood boiled as I read about her actions. She had used her position to look down on people who had spent decades building this company, and now she had crossed a line with me. I wasn't just going to let her continue this behavior. Today I would show her who I really was. She was going to learn that actions have consequences, and that no one, no matter their status, was above the basic decency of treating others with respect. Emily was about to learn exactly what it meant to work for me, not just as her mother, but as her employer. The morning had passed in a blur of preparation and quiet determination. As I sat in my office, staring at the file on my desk, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do settling in. I had always tried to be patient, to let Emily grow into her own person, but her treatment of me and the people who had worked alongside me for years had crossed a line. She didn't know it yet, but I was about to show her that actions, especially those driven by arrogance and disdain, have consequences. I had already pulled up her file. There were multiple complaints against her from older employees, men and women who had spent decades at this company. There were stories of her making dismissive comments about their work, calling them outdated or slow, and even suggesting that they should step aside for younger talent. It wasn't just that she had criticized them. It was the venom behind her words, the way she looked down on them as though their years of experience meant nothing. It had been building for months, but now I had all the proof I needed. I wasn't just her mother anymore. I was her boss. And it was time for her to face the full weight of her actions. The clock on my wall ticked loudly, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet office. It was 9:45 a.m., and I had scheduled our meeting for 10. My heart pounded in my chest, but it wasn't fear I felt. It was a cold, unyielding resolve. I had spent my life building this company, creating a culture based on respect and inclusivity. Emily had never understood that. She had used her position to climb the ladder, stepping on the people who had helped me build this business. Now it was my turn to teach her a lesson. As the clock struck 10, I pressed the button on my intercom. "Helen, send Emily in," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the emotion I felt inside. Helen's voice came through the speaker. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. She'll be right in." I stood up, smoothing my blouse, and walked around my desk to stand by the window. I wanted to be calm, composed, and in control. This wasn't just a conversation. This was an opportunity to set the tone for the rest of her career. She was going to understand that no one, no matter who they were, could treat others with such disdain and expect to go unchallenged. She would learn that leadership wasn't about power. It was about respect, empathy, and the ability to lift others up. The door opened, and Emily walked in. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, and she immediately looked around the room as though assessing the situation. I could see the familiar flicker of surprise in her eyes when she saw me standing by the window. She wasn't expecting this. She wasn't expecting me to take control. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice already defensive, though she tried to mask it with a forced smile. She wasn't even pretending to be polite. The moment she crossed the threshold of the door, I could see the walls she had built around herself begin to rise. But I wasn't going to let her hide behind them this time. "I think we need to talk, Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. She took a step back, the realization dawning on her face that something was very wrong. "Please, take a seat." She hesitated for a moment before sitting down in the chair across from me, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. I could see her calculating her next move, trying to figure out how to get out of this without losing face. But this wasn't a conversation where she could charm her way out of anything. This was about responsibility. I sat down across from her, opening the file on my desk. "I've been reviewing your performance here at Morningstar," I began, keeping my eyes on her as I spoke. "There have been several complaints about your behavior, Emily, complaints that you've treated older employees with disrespect, belittling them for their experience and the work they've done for this company." Her face flushed, and she immediately opened her mouth to defend herself, but I held up my hand. "I've read everything, Emily. I've seen the way you've treated them, the way you've made them feel like they're not valuable because they're not as modern as you want them to be." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle between us. "You've shown no regard for the people who have built this company, people who have been with us since the beginning. And that's not something I can overlook." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her mouth opening and closing as though she couldn't find the right words. I didn't mean. "I don't care what you meant," I interrupted, my voice steady. "Your actions speak louder than any apology you can give me now. You've been condescending to the very people who made this company successful. You've belittled their work, undermined their experience, and disrespected them simply because they're not as young or fast as you think they should be." Emily opened her mouth again, but this time, no words came out. I could see the panic rising in her eyes as she realized that there was no excuse for what she had done. The shield she had carefully constructed around herself, her success, her youth, her image, was crumbling, and she had no way of stopping it. "I'm not firing you," I continued, leaning forward slightly, "but I'm transferring you to the kitchen department, effective immediately." I let the words hang in the air between us. "You'll work with the custodial team, and you'll learn what it means to do honest, hard work without any recognition. You'll learn what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated as less than." Her eyes widened, her body going stiff as she tried to comprehend what I was saying. "You can't be serious?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am," I said, my tone unwavering. "This is what happens when you treat people with disrespect. You get a taste of your own medicine. Maybe then you'll understand the value of kindness, of experience, and of humility." She sat there for a long moment, processing the shock of what I had just said. Then, with a final, defiant look, she stood up. "I won't do this," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm not going to be punished like this." "I'm not punishing you, Emily," I replied, my voice soft but firm. "I'm giving you an opportunity to grow. You can take it, or you can leave. The choice is yours." She stood there for a moment longer, and then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving me alone with the weight of the decision I had made. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She needed to understand that her actions had consequences, and if she wanted to be a leader, she had to learn what it truly meant to lead. Now it was up to her, and I had no doubt that whatever path she chose, it would be a defining moment in her life. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling of everything I had hoped for. The first few days after Emily's transfer to the kitchen were quieter than I expected. I had thought that her pride would drive her to defy the punishment I had imposed, that she would quit in a dramatic, overblown exit. But instead, she went silent. There was no confrontation, no angry phone calls, no desperate pleas for me to reconsider. She simply took her place in the cafeteria, reporting to the custodial team each day, and I was left to wonder if she was truly learning anything, or if she was just stewing in her resentment. I had watched her struggle for the first few days. The woman who had spent so much of her life carefully constructing an image of control and superiority now found herself in a world of hard work, menial tasks, and, worst of all, the employees she had so often belittled. I knew the shock of her situation would set in soon enough, but part of me still wondered if this would be enough for her to change, if she would truly understand the lesson I was trying to teach her. The reports I received from the cafeteria were mixed. Some of the staff said she was quiet, doing her work without complaint, while others said she had been less than receptive to the other workers. I had hoped that seeing the level of dedication and effort these people put into their jobs would humble her. But there were still murmurs of her dismissive attitude, just masked behind the discomfort of her new role. I knew that, for Emily, this wasn't just about the work. It was about the way she saw herself in relation to everyone else. The resentment she had carried for so long had not magically disappeared, but perhaps I was starting to see a glimmer of change. A week into her new position, I decided to visit the kitchen myself. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to see, maybe some breakthrough moment, or perhaps just a subtle shift in her demeanor. It was mid-morning when I arrived, and the kitchen was busy with its usual morning rush, the sound of clattering pans and sizzling food filling the air. There was a sort of calm efficiency to the chaos, an energy I admired, and I found myself wondering if Emily, once so accustomed to walking into rooms and commanding attention, was feeling out of place. I stepped quietly into the back of the kitchen, my presence unnoticed at first. I watched Emily for a moment as she worked at a station, her hands moving quickly to prep vegetables. Her designer clothes were long gone, replaced by a standard-issue uniform, worn, practical, and as anonymous as the rest of the workers. Her hair, once so perfectly styled, was tucked into a hairnet. Her manicured nails were now chipped, the polished facade she had so carefully curated reduced to nothing. As I stood there, one of the older workers, Maria, approached me. She smiled warmly, her hands covered in flour as she wiped them on her apron. "Mrs. Morrison, what brings you down here?" she asked. "I was just checking in," I said, my eyes still on Emily. "How's she doing?" Maria followed my gaze, then glanced back at me. "Well, she's quiet," she said carefully, as if choosing her words with care. "She's not the easiest to work with, but she does the work. The others are happy to have her here, though I don't think she likes being around them much." I nodded, absorbing the information. "I see," I replied. I watched Emily for a moment longer, then turned to leave, but before I could step out, I heard her voice calling after me. "Mom!" She had spotted me, and I couldn't help but notice the way she hesitated before approaching, her steps uncertain. Her face was flushed, and there was a strange vulnerability in her eyes, a look I had never seen before. I turned around to face her, trying to remain neutral. "Emily," I said quietly, keeping my voice calm. I don't know why you're doing this," she began, her words shaky, as if she wasn't sure whether she should continue. "I know I've been difficult, but this is humiliating." I watched her, feeling a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or frustration, but I wasn't sure if it was directed at me or herself. "What did you expect, Emily?" I asked gently. "For me to turn a blind eye to how you treated people, how you treated me? This isn't about punishment. It's about teaching you something you've never understood. That respect isn't earned by climbing over others. It's about recognizing the value in every person, regardless of their title or position." Her eyes shifted to the floor, and she didn't say anything for a long while. The hum of the kitchen, the clinking of dishes, the sizzling of food, it all felt like background noise to the heavy silence between us. I had to admit, part of me wanted her to see the truth. I wanted her to realize that this wasn't just a lesson in humility, it was a lesson in humanity, but I wasn't sure if she was ready to hear it. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now, almost tentative. I've never really seen things that way. I always thought I had to keep pushing, keep climbing, and I guess I forgot how to look at people." I nodded, the faintest hint of relief washing over me. "That's a start," I said quietly. "It's not too late, Emily, but you have to understand that real leadership isn't about power. It's about lifting others up, not tearing them down. It's about seeing value in people, no matter where they are." She nodded slowly, her eyes still downcast. There was something different in her demeanor now, something that hinted at change, though I knew it wouldn't happen overnight. She was still angry, still resistant in many ways, but for the first time, I saw a small crack in her defenses. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. "I'll try," she whispered, almost to herself. I gave her a small smile but didn't say anything more. The work she needed to do was hers alone, but I had made my point. She had a long way to go, but at least she was beginning to understand that growth wasn't about climbing higher. It was about how you treated the people along the way. As I turned to leave, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, not because I had won or defeated her, but because I had given her the opportunity to change. And now it was up to her whether she would take it. The days after my conversation with Emily in the kitchen felt quieter, almost as though the weight of everything had shifted, even if just slightly. It wasn't that things were perfect, but there was a certain stillness that came with knowing the ball was now in her court. I had given her the opportunity to change, to learn, but whether or not she would take it was beyond my control. What mattered now was how she responded to the lesson she had been given. I didn't expect an overnight transformation, but I hoped, deep down, that something would click. The first week passed without much drama. Emily continued to show up at the kitchen, doing her work without complaint, though she still kept to herself, avoiding too much interaction with the other workers. I could see the tension in her body, the discomfort in her eyes when she was around people who had no interest in her wealth or status. They didn't treat her as special, as Emily had grown accustomed to. To them, she was just another person doing a job. For the first time in her life, she wasn't able to command attention by simply existing. I checked in on her every few days, watching from a distance, making sure she wasn't regressing into her old habits. I could see the frustration building in her, the inner conflict between the girl who had always been told she was better than everyone else and the woman who was now being humbled by the very people she had once looked down upon. But there was something different this time. I noticed it in the small things, the way she hesitated before making a sharp comment, or the way she started talking to the other workers more often, even if it was just about the job itself. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. A few days ago, I received a report from Maria, one of the kitchen supervisors. She mentioned that Emily had made a comment about one of the older workers, calling him too slow and outdated, just like she had with the employees in the office. I wasn't surprised. Old habits die hard, and I knew this wasn't going to be an easy road for her. I decided I needed to address it directly, but this time, I wasn't going to be as forgiving. The lesson needed to be clear. She couldn't slip back into the patterns that had caused her to treat people poorly. If she wanted to be part of this company, she needed to learn humility, true humility, not just the surface level apologies and promises of change. I called Emily into my office again. This time, I wasn't standing by the window. I was sitting at my desk, the papers neatly arranged before me, and I had a feeling she was nervous about what was coming. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. When she walked in, she was wearing her usual kitchen uniform, nothing fancy, just the standard issue with a hairnet. She looked different this time, though. Her shoulders were a little slouched, as if she were carrying the weight of something. The usual pride she wore like armor had begun to crack, and I could see it in her eyes. "Sit down, Emily," I said, motioning to the chair across from me. She did, but there was a hesitation in her movement, like she was unsure of how this conversation would go. I let her sit for a moment, then I spoke. "I got a report from Maria today," I began, keeping my tone steady. "She mentioned that you made a comment about one of the older workers being too slow. Is that true?" Her face flushed, and she looked away for a moment, trying to collect herself. I didn't mean it the way it sounded," she said quickly, her voice defensive. "I was just frustrated. The kitchen's not like I thought it would be, and I was tired. I didn't mean to insult anyone." I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't mean to insult anyone, but you did. This isn't just about how you're feeling, Emily. It's about how you make others feel. And the way you've been talking about the people who work here, it's exactly what I tried to teach you before. You've been looking down on people for not meeting your standards. But the truth is, you're not the one who gets to decide who's valuable and who isn't. We all have our roles here, and everyone plays a part in making this company work. No one is outdated. No one is too slow. If you think that, then you haven't learned anything from this experience." Her eyes darted to the floor, and I could see the weight of my words hitting her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, almost too quietly to hear. I didn't mean it. I just, I've always been the best, you know? I've always had to prove I'm better than everyone, and now I feel like I'm stuck here. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words settle. I understand that you've spent your life trying to prove yourself, Emily, but being better than everyone else doesn't mean you get to treat them like they're beneath you. Being better means you can lift others up. You've been stuck in your own view of the world for so long that you haven't realized how damaging that perspective is. It's time you learn to see things differently. I want you to go back into the kitchen tomorrow and apologize to the team, especially the older workers you've belittled. They deserve an apology, and they deserve to know that you see their worth. I could see the fight in her, the hesitation, the embarrassment, but I could also see something else. There was a flicker of realization in her eyes. She wasn't just listening to me, she was hearing me. "I'll do it," she said, the words coming out slowly, but with a sincerity that hadn't been there before. "I know I've been wrong. I'll apologize to everyone, and I'll start working on being better. I don't want to keep feeling like this." I nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at my lips. "That's all I ask. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with acknowledging the mistakes you've made. You're still my daughter, Emily. I still love you. But you need to understand that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn by giving it to others." She stood up, her shoulders a little straighter than before, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the person I had hoped she would become. "I'll make it right," she said, and I believed her. As she left my office, I sat back in my chair, letting out a deep breath. The road ahead for Emily wouldn't be easy. She had a lot of work to do, and I knew there would be setbacks along the way. But for the first time, I felt like there was a chance for her to truly change, not just for me, but for herself. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the most difficult lessons are the ones that shape us into who we're truly meant to be. The following weeks passed in a haze of quiet change. Emily's apology to the team in the kitchen was not without its awkwardness, but it was sincere. I could tell that the act of humbling herself in front of the very people she had once belittled wasn't easy, but she did it. And for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of the daughter I used to know, the one who had once been full of promise, before she'd become so caught up in her image and her desire to be the best. She didn't suddenly become a perfect employee overnight, nor did she stop making mistakes. But the apology seemed to serve as a turning point for her. I heard from Maria, the kitchen supervisor, that Emily had started engaging more with the team. She even began offering help to the older workers, asking questions about their tasks, their routines. Slowly, like someone trying to repair something long broken, she was rebuilding the trust she had lost, not just with the people around her, but with herself. The change was subtle at first. In the mornings, Emily would come to work a little earlier than usual, her movements less rushed, more deliberate. She no longer walked around with the air of someone who felt she deserved special treatment. There was no more need to put on a show for anyone. The confident, almost arrogant energy she used to carry with her seemed to have shifted into something quieter, something humbler. One morning, a month after I had moved Emily to the kitchen, I decided to stop by to check on her. The kitchen had been a key part of my company from the start, and I wanted to see how she was handling the environment. I walked into the bustling kitchen, the familiar sounds of clattering dishes and sizzling food filling the air, and immediately noticed a difference. Emily was no longer standing off to the side, avoiding interaction. She was at a counter, chopping vegetables, chatting casually with Maria as they worked. There was a rhythm to her movements, a grace I hadn't seen before. She wasn't just performing the task. She was engaging, asking questions, listening, learning. When she saw me, she smiled. It wasn't the forced smile she used to give me, the one that barely touched her eyes. This one was genuine, and it made my heart swell just a little. She wasn't perfect yet. There was still a long way to go, but she was moving in the right direction. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope that she would get there. "Hey, Mom," she said, her voice warm but casual. "How's everything going? I hope I didn't keep you waiting." I couldn't help but smile. "No, I just got here. How's everything going with the team?" She paused for a moment, looking over at the workers. It's been good. I'm still learning a lot, but I think we're getting into a rhythm. She glanced down at the vegetables she was chopping. It's not easy, but it's rewarding. I didn't expect it to be so humbling, but it's taught me a lot. About people, about myself. I nodded, proud of her, but not wanting to make her feel like I was judging her progress. I'm glad to hear that. I know it's not what you were expecting, but it's a step in the right direction. Emily set down the knife and looked at me. I know I've messed up, and I know I've hurt people, including you, but I want you to know I'm trying. I'm really trying to be better. Her voice was steady, no longer defensive. It was the kind of apology that comes from the heart, the kind that acknowledges the hurt without making excuses. I can see that, Emily, I said softly, and I'm proud of you. It's not easy to admit when you're wrong, especially when it's something that's been a part of who you are for so long. But this is where real growth happens, in the uncomfortable moments, in the moments where you don't have all the answers. She nodded, a faint smile on her lips. Yeah, it's not easy, but it's worth it. I've learned that. I've spent so much time trying to prove myself, trying to climb to the top, that I forgot what really matters. I'm starting to get it now. It's not about the title or the position. It's about respect and treating people the way they deserve to be treated. I reached out and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. You're getting it, Emily. You're getting there. It's a process, but I can see the change in you. And that's all I've ever wanted for you. To be the best version of yourself. Not the version that you think the world wants, but the version that's true to who you are. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes softening. Thanks, Mom. That means more than you know. I smiled and gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. I'm proud of you, Emily. Keep going. As I left the kitchen, I felt a sense of quiet pride. Emily wasn't perfect, but she was working on herself. She was finally beginning to understand what it meant to lead with kindness, humility, and respect for others. There was still work to be done, still growth to be had, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe easier when I looked at her. She was on the right path, and that was enough for me. Over the next few weeks, Emily continued to show signs of growth. She was more engaged with the team, helping out with tasks she once considered beneath her. She had stopped referring to herself as better than anyone else. And more importantly, she began to look at her colleagues, not as obstacles, not as people she needed to surpass, but as equal partners. It was a slow transformation, but a real one. I knew that Emily would continue to struggle, that she would falter at times, but I also knew that she had taken the first steps toward understanding what true leadership meant. She was learning that it wasn't about titles or social status. It was about earning respect through empathy, hard work, and integrity. And in that, I found peace. The weeks that followed felt different, lighter, in a way. Emily had settled into a routine in the kitchen, but there was something more significant happening beneath the surface. The change wasn't just in the way she worked, it was in the way she moved through the world now. It was subtle at first, but I began to see small shifts in how she interacted with the people around her. There was less distance between her and the rest of the team, less arrogance in her posture. She still had a long way to go, but I could see that she was trying, really trying, to embrace the lesson I had set for her. I noticed it one morning when I arrived at the office earlier than usual. As I walked past the cafeteria, I could hear laughter from inside. It was a sound I hadn't heard coming from Emily in a long time. When I peered through the door, I saw her sitting at one of the tables with some of the other workers. She was smiling, her shoulders relaxed, engaged in a conversation with Maria and a few others. It struck me then, Emily wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was part of the team. Later that afternoon, I bumped into her as I was leaving my office. She was heading to the cafeteria for a break, and I stopped her for a moment. Hey, Emily, I said, smiling at her. How's everything going in the kitchen? She looked at me, her eyes bright with something resembling pride. It's been good, Mom. I feel like I'm finally where I need to be. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm getting there. And I don't know, I think I've started to enjoy it. Her voice was lighter than I'd heard it in a long time. I raised an eyebrow. Enjoy it? You're telling me that after all this time, you actually enjoy working in the kitchen? She laughed softly. I didn't expect it, but yeah, there's something satisfying about it. There's no pretension, no pressure to be something I'm not. It's just work. But it's honest work, and I respect it. The people I work with, they've taught me more than I could have ever imagined. My heart swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. I'm glad to hear that, Emily. It's good to see you finally embracing it. You're starting to understand what it really means to lead with humility. She paused, and for a moment, there was a quiet intensity in her eyes. I never realized how much I took for granted before. All this time, I was focused on climbing the ladder, proving myself, that I didn't see the people who were helping me along the way. I was too busy looking down on them. I nodded. I think that's something we all learn at different times in life. It's not about climbing over others. It's about lifting them up and lifting yourself in the process. It sounds like you're starting to get that now. Her smile softened. I am. It's hard, but I'm trying to do better. For myself, for everyone around me. And I believed her. She wasn't perfect, but she was making progress. The old Emily, the one who had been so quick to judge others, to hold herself above them, was fading, replaced by someone more aware of her impact, more humble, and more willing to learn. Later that week, I had another meeting with the leadership team to discuss the state of the company and the feedback from employees. As usual, I received a mix of reports, some positive, some neutral, and a few negative. But when the discussion turned to the kitchen, I was surprised by what I heard. Maria, the supervisor, spoke up about Emily. She's doing great, Maria said, smiling. At first, she was hesitant to get involved with the team, but now she's really stepping up. She's not just doing the work, she's helping others. And she listens, really listens. I can see that she's growing. I blinked in surprise. Really? Maria nodded. Yes, she's not the same person she was when she first started, and I think that's a good thing. She's still got a lot to learn, but there's a different energy about her now. People respect her. And that's saying something. I sat back in my chair, taking in Maria. This was a turning point. Emily was no longer just my daughter trying to prove herself. She was becoming someone others could look up to, someone who had earned their respect, not because of her title, but because of her actions. Over the next few weeks, Emily continued to show signs of growth. She wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect her to be, but she was becoming more grounded. She started speaking up more in meetings, offering suggestions not as someone trying to prove she belonged, but as someone who genuinely wanted to contribute. And slowly, the team began to see her differently, not as the boss's daughter, but as a valued member of the team. One afternoon, as I was walking through the office, I saw Emily standing by the window, looking out at the view. She seemed lost in thought, so I walked up to her. "Penny for your thoughts?" I asked gently. She turned to me, a soft smile on her face. I was just thinking about everything, about how far I've come, how much I've learned, and I realized I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. Not to you, not to anyone. I just needed to be real. I spent so much time trying to live up to some image of who I thought I should be. But I finally figured out who I really am. Her words hit me hard, and I couldn't help but feel proud. For the first time, I saw the person I had always hoped she would be, the woman who understood the true value of hard work, humility, and compassion. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was someone who had earned her place in the world on her own terms. I stood beside her, looking out at the city. I'm proud of you, Emily. You've come a long way, and I know it wasn't easy, but you've earned it. You've earned your place, not by climbing above others, but by lifting them up with you. She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the view. Thanks, Mom. That means everything to me. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about her growth. It was about our relationship. We were no longer standing on opposite sides, struggling for recognition. We were standing together, side by side, knowing that true success wasn't about power or status. It was about learning, growing, and giving back. And together we had found a new understanding, a new beginning. As the months passed, I began to feel the weight of the changes in Emily more profoundly. The young woman who had once been so wrapped up in her own ambitions, so consumed by proving herself above others, was slowly but surely becoming someone I could be proud of. She wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but the shift in her attitude was undeniable. She had begun to see the value of those around her, to respect their contributions, and in doing so, she was starting to see the value in herself in a way that wasn't defined by wealth or social status. There was something else, too. I noticed a change in her approach to her work, in the way she communicated with others. It wasn't about grand gestures or trying to prove her worth anymore. It was about consistency, honesty, and collaboration. I could see it in her interactions with the team in the kitchen, in the way she began offering her help without expecting recognition or praise. She was learning to be a team player, to step back and listen. And that was the kind of leader I had always wanted her to be, one who led with compassion and humility. One afternoon, I received an email that made me stop and reflect. It was from Maria, the kitchen supervisor, and it was a recommendation letter for Emily. In the past, I would have dismissed such things as formalities, but this one was different. Maria spoke of Emily's growth, of how she had changed from the person who had once been standoffish and critical to someone who had embraced the values of hard work and respect. Maria praised her for her newfound sense of teamwork and the way she now genuinely cared for her colleagues. She had become not just an employee, but a leader who was willing to lift up others without needing to shine in the spotlight. It made me proud, but it also made me realize how far we had come, not just as mother and daughter, but as people who had both learned important lessons. Emily had been through her share of struggles, and so had I. But somehow, this journey of growth, though difficult, had brought us closer together in ways I hadn't anticipated. But with all the growth came a deeper level of reflection. I found myself thinking about the years I had spent watching Emily grow up, the mistakes she had made, and the harsh lessons she had learned. I thought about the times I had wanted to shield her from the world, to protect her from the pain of failure. But as much as I had tried, there was no avoiding the truth. Failure was often the best teacher. I had tried to shelter her from the consequences of her actions, but now I realized that those very consequences were what had helped her develop into someone I could respect. It made me think about my own life and the lessons I had learned along the way. I had always been focused on building a legacy, on ensuring that Morningstar Designs was something that would stand the test of time. But in the process, I had sometimes neglected the most important relationships in my life, the ones that truly mattered. My relationship with Emily had been strained for years, and while I had been so focused on my company, I had lost sight of the fact that my greatest success wasn't my business. It was my family. And the greatest lesson of all was understanding that the love and respect we shared could build something even more lasting than any company could. One evening, as I sat on my porch reflecting on all of this, Emily came outside and sat beside me. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the garden, and for a moment we both just sat there in silence, listening to the hum of the evening. It felt peaceful, like we were finally in a place where the past didn't weigh so heavily on us. "How's the kitchen going?" I asked, glancing over at her. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It's going well, actually. I've been helping with some new ideas for the menu, and the team's been really supportive. I'm still learning, but I'm happy." "I'm glad," I said, my voice quiet but filled with meaning. "I know it hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of the progress you've made, Emily. More than you know." She turned to me, her expression softer than I'd seen in a long time. "Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it. You've taught me a lot, even when I didn't want to hear it. But I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. It's not about always being on top. It's about being grounded, being honest with yourself, and with the people around you." I nodded slowly, taking in her words. It's about understanding your worth without needing to prove it all the time. And it's about lifting others up along the way, not stepping on them to get ahead. She looked out at the horizon, her expression thoughtful. "I've spent so much of my life trying to prove that I was worth something, that I was better than, well, everyone else. But I don't feel that way anymore. I'm starting to realize that the best kind of success is the kind you share, not the kind you hoard." I felt a lump in my throat, the weight of everything we had been through rising to the surface. "You're right, Emily. That's the kind of success I want for you, too. Not the kind that makes you feel isolated, but the kind that connects you to people. People who respect you because of who you are, not because of what you've achieved. She smiled, and for the first time in years, I saw the warmth in her eyes that had been missing for so long. It was a smile that felt like a fresh start, like we had both come full circle. The path ahead wasn't going to be perfect, and there would still be challenges to face. But in that moment, I knew we were on the right track. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat there with my daughter, not as a mother giving advice, but as a woman who had learned alongside her. We were both evolving, learning new lessons, and finally, we were doing it together. And that, in the end, was what truly mattered. The weeks that followed Emily's reflection on her growth brought with them a sense of quiet but profound change. I watched her work with the kitchen team, observing how she had transformed into a true part of the group, someone who no longer stood apart from them, but stood with them. It wasn't just about the work. It was about the way she began to interact with everyone. Her attitude had shifted from one of superiority to one of partnership and respect. But despite all the progress, there were moments when I could see old habits creeping back into her behavior. Little remarks here and there, moments of frustration where she slipped into her old ways of thinking that she was somehow above the others because of her background, because of her past successes. It wasn't that she was consciously trying to put herself on a pedestal again, but the pull of her old mindset was hard to resist. And when that happened, I found myself wondering if the change was truly sustainable, or if it was just a temporary shift brought on by the need to prove something. One morning, after she had been in the kitchen for several weeks, I received a phone call from Maria, the supervisor. Maria sounded hesitant, but I could tell something had happened. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice careful, "I just wanted to let you know about a conversation that took place this morning between Emily and one of the senior kitchen staff, Janet." My heart sank. I didn't need to hear the rest, but I let Maria continue. There was some tension. Emily made a comment about Janet's approach to a recipe, and she said it was outdated. Janet was upset, and I could see the look on her face. I think Emily may have been too harsh in her critique. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that Emily was struggling to fully let go of her old tendencies. The kitchen wasn't just a place to learn how to cook or manage. It was a space where she had to confront the emotional challenges of her past behavior and try to overcome them. And now I realized I had to step in again. Later that day, I found Emily sitting alone in the break room, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, there was a flicker of guilt in her eyes. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I went straight to the point. "I got a call from Maria this morning," I said, my voice steady but firm, "about what happened with Janet." Her shoulders tensed, and she set the cup down, her gaze shifting away from me. "I didn't mean to upset her, Mom. I was just trying to help, to make sure the recipe was better." I crossed my arms, my voice gentle but not forgiving. "I know you think you were helping, but you can't just walk into a situation and start criticizing people, Emily. You've been learning about respect, about working with others, not against them. This comment you made to Janet, it wasn't about improving something. It was about dismissing her experience. And that's not what we've been working on." She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it again. The words didn't come, and I could see the conflict in her eyes, between the woman she was trying to become and the old habits she had been taught for so long. "I've told you before," I continued. "It's not just about the work, Emily. It's about how you treat people, especially those who have been doing this for years. You're still in the learning phase, and Janet's been here longer than anyone. Her approach matters. You have to learn to respect that." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples, looking more exhausted than I had seen her in a while. "I get it, okay? I know I messed up. I don't know how to not say what's on my mind sometimes. I don't want to make people feel bad, but I feel like I have to be better to prove I can do this." I sat down beside her, trying to ease the tension in the room. "You don't have to prove anything, Emily. You've already proved more than enough, but what you have to understand is that the way you treat others, especially when you're in a leadership role, has a lasting impact. Your words have power. They can build people up or they can break them down. If you want to be a leader, you have to learn to use that power wisely. She was quiet for a moment, letting my words sink in. Finally, she turned to face me, a small, tired smile forming on her lips. I'm trying, Mom. I really am, but sometimes I feel like I'm walking a tightrope. It's hard to keep my old ways in check. I reached out and placed a hand on hers, offering her a soft, reassuring squeeze. It's a process, Emily. Change doesn't happen in an instant. You've made so much progress already, but you have to be patient with yourself. And when you slip up, you have to own it and learn from it. That's how you grow. She nodded, her eyes softening. I'll apologize to Janet. I'll make it right. I know you will, I said, standing up. And remember, being a good leader means more than just getting the work done. It means understanding the people you work with, respecting their knowledge, and knowing when to listen instead of always trying to fix everything yourself. Emily took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing. I'll get it right. I promise. As I left the break room, I felt a mix of pride and concern. Emily was trying, but the road ahead was still long, and there would be more moments like this. Times when her old habits would resurface, and she would need to confront them head on. But I knew she was capable of it. The woman she was becoming was someone who could truly lead with integrity and humility. And that, more than anything, made me believe in her future. That evening, Emily came home from work and told me that she had apologized to Janet. She said the conversation had been a little awkward at first, but that Janet had appreciated the sincerity of her apology. Emily's smile, though still tinged with uncertainty, was genuine. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was seeing the real Emily, the one who wasn't afraid to admit her mistakes and take responsibility for them. There was still much to be done. But in that moment, I realized that we were both on a path to something better, not just as mother and daughter, but as two people learning to be the best versions of themselves. And that, I knew, was all I had ever hoped for. The weeks continued to unfold, and as they did, Emily's journey toward change began to feel less like a struggle and more like a quiet, steady evolution. I could see the shifts in her that I had once only hoped for. She had stopped rushing through everything, no longer trying to prove something to everyone. She was becoming more aware of the small, everyday moments where respect was earned, not demanded. I began to notice that she was taking time to listen, really listen, to the people around her. Her posture had changed. She no longer stood with the defensiveness of someone constantly bracing for judgment. Instead, she was open, engaged, and present. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when the old Emily tried to resurface, when she would catch herself, ready to offer a sharp remark or to place herself above others. But now those moments were fewer, and when they did happen, she recognized them. She would pause, take a breath, and make the effort to correct herself, to be more mindful of her words and actions. I could see that she was putting in the effort, not just to fix things, but to genuinely grow. One afternoon, about 2 months after Emily's apology to Janet, I decided to sit in on one of the team meetings in the kitchen. I hadn't been involved in the kitchen for a while, and though I kept hearing positive feedback, I wanted to see it for myself. As I walked in, I noticed the usual buzz of activity. The chefs working efficiently, the team moving in sync, and the chatter that came with shared work and camaraderie. It felt different from the tense, almost competitive atmosphere that used to permeate the kitchen when Emily first joined. She was at the center of the meeting, leading the discussion about a new menu item they were considering for the upcoming season. I watched as she spoke, her tone confident but not overbearing, her words focused on ideas that included input from everyone in the room. She wasn't talking down to anyone or trying to take credit for the work. Instead, she was guiding the conversation, offering her thoughts while also encouraging others to share theirs. There was something calming about watching her now. She wasn't the brash, self-absorbed version of herself I had known. She was a leader, not because she claimed authority, but because she respected the expertise of those around her. When someone spoke up with an idea, Emily didn't brush them off or try to one-up them. She listened. She asked questions, engaged with their suggestions, and acknowledged the value of their input. At one point during the meeting, Maria, the kitchen supervisor, looked over at me and gave me a subtle nod, as if to say, "She's come a long way." And she had. I could see it in the way the team responded to Emily, how they respected her and valued her opinion. I had always known that Emily had leadership potential, but it wasn't until she stopped trying to assert dominance and started working with others that she truly began to shine. After the meeting, Emily walked over to where I was standing by the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hey, Mom," she said, a smile creeping across her face. "How did it go? You look like you've been watching a soap opera from the sidelines." I chuckled, taking in the playful teasing in her tone. "You've changed, Emily. I'm proud of you." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unsure if I was joking. "I have? You mean I'm not still the insufferable, egotistical boss's daughter?" "No," I said softly. "You're not. You've become someone I can respect, not because of who you are to me, but because of who you've chosen to become. You're a leader now, not because you're trying to prove something, but because you've learned to value the people around you." Her eyes softened, and for a moment she just stood there looking at me. Then she took a breath and said, "I've still got a lot of work to do, but I feel like I'm getting there. I'm not perfect, and I never will be, but I'm finally starting to understand what matters." "I know you're not perfect, Emily," I said, my voice steady, "but that's the beauty of it. Perfection isn't what you're aiming for. You're aiming for growth, for understanding, for connection, and you're doing it even when it's hard." She smiled at that, and I could see a different light in her eyes now. It was the same light I had seen years ago, before she became so wrapped up in the idea of success. It was the light of someone who had finally realized that success wasn't about climbing over others. It was about lifting everyone up together. Later that night, after Emily had finished her shift and we were sitting in the living room, I reflected on everything that had happened over the last several months. The journey had been long and challenging, and there were moments where I wondered if Emily would ever fully understand the lessons I was trying to teach her. But now, as I sat beside her, I realized that the greatest lesson of all wasn't about the business or about proving worth. It was about embracing change, about learning to treat others with the respect they deserved, and about accepting that true leadership comes from humility, not authority. As Emily looked over at me, her face relaxed. I realized that we had both learned something valuable. She had learned the importance of humility, and I had learned that letting go, allowing someone to find their own path, was sometimes the hardest and most rewarding thing a parent could do. "I don't think I would have gotten here without you, Mom," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "You got here because of you, Emily, but I'm glad I could be part of the journey," I said, my voice full of meaning. As we sat together, I couldn't help but feel hopeful about what the future held, not just for Emily, but for both of us. The road ahead was still unknown, but one thing was certain. We had both found our way back to each other, and that was the most important thing of all. It had been a few months since the turning point in the kitchen, and I could hardly believe how much had changed. When I first moved Emily into the kitchen, it had felt like a drastic decision, one that would either break her or force her to confront everything she had been running from. But as time went on, I began to see the subtle shifts, the small but meaningful moments where Emily was becoming someone I recognized again. She wasn't the same person she had been at the beginning of this journey, and I was beginning to believe that this transformation could be permanent. One afternoon, after a particularly successful team meeting about a new menu initiative, Emily called me into her office at the kitchen. She had set aside time after her shift to chat, which wasn't unusual, but there was something in her tone when she asked me to meet her that piqued my curiosity. I had a feeling it was something significant, and as I walked into the kitchen area, I saw her standing near the prep station, smiling a little nervously. "Hey, Mom, can we talk for a second?" she asked, her voice warm, but with a slight edge of uncertainty I hadn't seen in her in a while. "Of course," I said, walking toward her. "What's on your mind?" Emily glanced over her shoulder, then back at me, as if weighing the words in her mind. I've been thinking a lot about the last few months, everything that's happened, and honestly, it's been eye-opening for me. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. She took a deep breath, her expression serious now. I've realized that I've been carrying a lot of weight. Weight from all the expectations I put on myself, the pressures of trying to be something I'm not, and honestly, all the ways I tried to make myself feel better by putting others down. I've spent so much time trying to outrun failure and judgment that I didn't realize I was hurting people along the way. I could hear the vulnerability in her voice, and it struck me how far she'd come. This wasn't the Emily I had first confronted in the office, the one who had been defensive and guarded. This was the Emily who had finally started to understand what it meant to be accountable for her actions, not just to me, but to the people around her. Sometimes we carry things we don't need to, Emily, I said softly. But the important thing is that you see it now. You're not perfect, and neither am I, but the fact that you're able to recognize what you've done and how it's affected others, that's what matters. You've been trying to live up to an image, but it's your true self that people are starting to see. That's the real Emily. She smiled, a small, genuine smile, and for a moment, I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. Thanks, Mom. I think I've been running away from the idea that I wasn't good enough unless I was better than everyone else. But the truth is, I'm just me, and I want to be okay with that. I don't need to be perfect or better than anyone else to be valuable. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride and relief. You've always been valuable, Emily. You just needed to see that for yourself. There was a long pause, as if she was reflecting on everything she had just said before she spoke again. I've also been thinking about the future, about how I want to move forward in my career and with the company. She hesitated, then looked directly at me. Mom, I want to take on more responsibility. I want to help lead. Not because I need to prove something, but because I think I'm ready to. I don't just want to do the work. I want to be part of building something. I want to make a difference, not just in the kitchen, but with the company. And I want to do it in a way that respects everyone, that acknowledges their contributions, not just my own. I could feel a lump form in my throat as she spoke, and I had to pause for a moment to take it in. Emily was asking for more responsibility, not out of a need for power, but because she genuinely felt ready to contribute in a meaningful way. It was a huge step for her. And for me, that's a big step, Emily, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But I'm proud of you. You've learned so much, and I think you're more than ready for it. You're not the same person you were when you started, and that's the person I always knew you could become. She looked at me with a mix of gratitude and relief, as if a weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Thanks, Mom. I'm really grateful for all the chances you've given me, and for not giving up on me, even when I was difficult. You've always been worth it, Emily, I said, reaching out to touch her arm, and you always will be. In that moment, I realized how much we had both changed. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was becoming a leader in her own right. The pride I felt for her wasn't about her position in the company or her achievements. It was about the person she had become. She had finally learned that the true measure of success wasn't about how high you climbed or how much you achieved. It was about how you treated people along the way, how you lifted others up, and how you stayed true to yourself. As we stood there in the quiet of the kitchen, I knew that the journey wasn't over. There would still be struggles, still moments of doubt, but the foundation had been built, and it was stronger than ever. Emily was ready for whatever came next, and so was I. I'm excited for what's ahead, she said, breaking the silence, and I think I'm ready to take it on, whatever comes next, together. And in that moment, I knew she was ready. Ready to lead, ready to contribute, and most of all, ready to continue becoming the person she had always been meant to be. In life, growth comes from embracing both our strengths and flaws, and learning to accept that perfection is not the goal. The most important lessons often come from our mistakes and failures, and it's through facing those challenges with humility and resilience that we evolve. It's crucial to understand that success isn't measured by titles, status, or material achievements, but by how we treat others and how we lift them up along the way. True leadership isn't about asserting dominance or proving superiority. It's about listening, respecting, and supporting those around us. Take the time to learn from those who have more experience, and don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong. It's through vulnerability, accountability, and a willingness to change that we find our true strength. Be patient with yourself and others, recognizing that growth is a slow, often uncomfortable process, but it's worth it. Ultimately, the key to a fulfilling life is not in constantly striving to be better than others, but in becoming the best version of yourself, grounded in humility, respect, and compassion. Life is a journey, and each step you take with intention brings you closer to the person you are meant to be.